Hey, welcome everybody. I'm doing a video here on replacing the valve cover gasket on a 2005 Hyundai Accent. You see me here counting the number of bolts to the valve cover here. This wasn't a very tough job. It took a couple of hours just because I took my time. Right here you can see I'm just, if the camera will get out of the way, counting the bolts that I've got to remove. I went into this cold, valve cover gaskets themselves aren't too bad. You see two bolts on the side. I think they're about 8 on the top if memory serves, and there are a couple of hoses and a rail on the top too. Right there, I'm just checking the spark plugs, how they fit in, all that sort of stuff. Again, just getting the lay of the land here. We'll go over all this slowly and in detail, just to show how it goes in case you've got an Accent or maybe an Elantra, which is probably similar. In fact, most cars will use the same general procedure as this. Again, valve cover gasket replacements usually aren't that bad, unless you've got some sort of high-end German car, in which case, good luck to you. So again, I'm just taking a look here, getting an idea. Okay, I see a hose there that's got to come out. We'll take a look at that in a sec, zooming in a bit. Let's stop here for a second, and then we'll get started. All right, first things first. What I did was I labeled the spark plug wires here based on their position, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Probably not too easy to see the actual lettering on there, but that's what I've got there. Just cheap insurance, easy to mark this stuff. That way, when you come back in an hour, 2 hours, or maybe a couple of days, you don't want to mess up where the spark plugs are. You're gonna take a while trying to figure out how to diagnose this afterwards. So just get a piece of tape, put it on there, then you can remove these things with no problems at all. Just saves you a lot of time. All right, we've got the spark plug wires marked off. I took a little plastic piece off that covered the other end of the spark plug wires. You can see that there. Right now I'm removing a couple of bolts for a small rail that's sitting on top of the head. You can see it right there, little 2 bolts holding that down. I'm taking those out first because we're going to have to remove that, get that out of the way in order for us to move the valve cover gasket out. So I just moved that out. Now what I like to do when this happens, I like to thread the bolts right back in where they came from whenever possible. That way I don't lose them when it comes time to put this stuff back together. Loose bolts sitting around, that's just a recipe for trouble. So I'm putting them right back in. You can see right there. Now that the rail's out of the way, so we'll get things going here in just a sec. Okay, so that's done. Put the other bolt in right there. Again, there were 2 of them holding that railing down there. Next thing, I take a look around. There should be a hose coming in the back right there. You see that? So we're going to remove that small piece of rubber hosing. We'll get that out of the way. There's also another one on the right. We'll have to remove that as well, but get that out of the way. But in the meantime, let's start cracking open these valve cover gasket bolts. So we'll just loosen them up at the start. Again, there are about, I think, 8 or 10 of these guys, both on the top and on the side. So we'll just, get these things easy. When you take these off, you want to be careful you don't drop them in the engine bay. That's not a lot of fun trying to find that. Just not great. Over here on the side, there are a couple of bolts we had to remove from what I believe is the timing belt cover. You see over on the left there. I'm pulling that out. There's one on the left and one on the right. We'll get that out of the way. In the meantime, we'll continue along at the top there as well. Get the valve cover gasket bolts out from the rear end. Nice and easy, just loosening these guys up. But of course, nothing ever works perfectly, does it? And because I can tell because I dropped a bolt, sure enough. So it's crawling under there, and there it is right there under the car, waving and laughing. At least it fell all the way down, so that's good. Now, can I reach it? Nope, can't get it. So we'll just try a different angle here. Hold on just a sec. Reaching, plotting, planning. This happens every time. Oh, come on. No, not quite. Ooh, those wheel covers could use a little work. Oh, well. 12-year-old car, what are you going to do? And eventually, oh, got it. I think so. Yeah, now I got to get up. This gets harder every time. Up from the concrete, no fun. Here, let's keep going. All right, let's focus a little more on the side bolts that I've mentioned before. We've got 2 of them here. You can see I'm trying to get it right now with a wobble socket on there. Again, there are 2 of them. I believe that's the section, pretty sure that's the section covering the timing belt. You only have to take off the top 2. You don't have to take off the entire timing belt cover, fortunately, to get this out. So right now I'm just jiggling things along, going back and forth. It was a little tougher. There were some hoses blocking the way, so you couldn't get it straight on. So I had to use, a wobble extension. But once you do, it's fine. Oh, by the way, all the bolts on this, at least for this particular thing, were all 10 millimeters, so that was nice. So only one socket needed, which is great. All right, so I got that one loosened up. Now I get the other one off. The rear one's easier because the hose isn't in the way, so that comes out pretty quickly there. So again, not rocket science here. just showing you where these things are, so when it comes time to do this yourself, or if you're using it in a different car, it might be very similar. So we pull these guys out. These were different sizes than the other ones, so we'll have to make sure we keep those separate, but it'll be easy enough to spot. All right, we've got the valve cover off, and now we're going to scrape some of the old gasket material off. This is inevitable whenever you do this, especially with an old car. Some bits of the gasket, you can see that they're stuck to this thing. It wasn't hard to get this off. I had to do a little nudging and cajoling to get the thing going, but it came off eventually, but it left a little residue. Now notice I'm taking a small razor blade and getting this stuff off. When you do this, you've got to be very careful. This is important. Very careful when you're scraping this stuff off that you don't nick the head. The heads are usually aluminum these days, which means they're easy to scratch. Scratches mean problems for seating the new gasket in without leaking. You got to be careful. So take your time here. Also, we're going to bag this thing. We're going to cover the gasket. We're going to cover the valve train so that no material falls in there. I'm just showing you really quickly what the procedure is. We'll take a closer look in just a second, just giving you an idea of what's all right, as promised, we've bagged the valve train. Just a couple of, a few plastic bags. You don't have to get too fancy here. And now we're going through with the razor blade. And with the bagging in there, that's eliminating the possibility that some of this gasket material is going to fall into the valve train and gunk things up down the road. Now you notice here I'm going very carefully, very slowly, parallel to the surface of the head. That way, again, you don't wind up gouging nicks and scratches into the head. Which again, this is usually a soft metal these days. Aluminum heads are very, very common today, especially on small passenger cars, and you can just have trouble if you wind up cutting into it with with seating the new valve cover gaskets in there. You're not going to get a proper seal. You're going to wind up with oil leaks. Who needs it, right? So just take your time. This took me a good deal of time, just slowly working my way through. And also, when I'd clean a section, I get a shop towel, spray some brake cleaner on there, and wipe things off just to make sure that the surface was clean. So that's what I'm doing here. Right now, I'm just scraping. I do a section at a time, and then I'll clean it off with a little, brake cleaner on a rag, and just work my way around. The front part's fine because it's easy to get to. The rear part was a little bit slower going because it wasn't as accessible. That just means you just take a little more time. Again, go through carefully. Some of these sections are not flat as well. A lot of them you're going to have arcs in them where the various chains and such go. So you want to pay careful attention there while you're scraping, so you don't wind up again gouging at anything. Just be careful. You can see what I'm doing. Just going very slowly on this. Take your time. Again, you've got the thing bagged off, so there's no risk of any gasket material falling in there. Again, clean up afterwards with a little brake cleaner on a shop rag, and you'll be in business. All right, next up, let's get ready to put the new valve cover gasket in there. I've got a nice name brand one from Molly. Some of you have heard of that name before, some of you haven't. This cost me, I think, $25. I would recommend getting a name brand gasket if you can. Don't get the El Cheapo, the cheapest one you can get. You save $5 or $6 or maybe $10. And you have to wind up going in here and doing it again because you used a cheap gasket. Not worth it. At least not in my opinion. So right now I'm just pulling this thing out. Oop, it snapped there. Now what happened on this particular model, the front where it was leaking, that part got very brittle and hard. The rest of it was still pliable rubber, but for whatever reason, at the front of the engine, it was very brittle. That probably contributed. Certainly did, in fact, because that's where the oil leak was going. So you notice I'm going around here, and it broke off again at the front because it just got very hard and non-pliable. So we'll take that out. Of course, when you're replacing these, make sure you're getting every little bit out. Take your time again. I'm sorry about the lighting here. It's not as good as it could be. Pulling that stuff out. Of course, I've got the gloves on because it's an oily mess. So that's not a surprise. Now I'm just inspecting, making sure I get everything out. I'm also going to replace those. I'm going to replace the spark plug gaskets as well. That's part of the kit too. So again, but right now I'm just going through, pulling out little bits. Take your time, go through, do a thorough inspection here. Make sure you get all the old gasket out before you put in the new one. Otherwise, you can have trouble seating it, and you might wind up with leaks down the road. So it's just a little, an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. Okay, so my hands are an oily mess. Let's dump these gloves and move on with some fresh ones. All right, after you're done, you just make sure that you've pressed in all the gasket material properly. There's the spark plug gaskets. Here's the valve cover gasket. Just double checking, make sure it's all in the grooves. These are all grooved, so they should be able to fit in fine. Make sure that everything's in there and you'll be in business. All right, it's time to finally put this thing back in. We got the gaskets in there, the spark plug gaskets, as well as the main valve cover gasket. Just double checking here, making sure everything's seated properly. Spark plug gaskets are in there nicely. not much fun having these things not put in right and finding it out after the fact. So take a second to take a look, make sure that's all in there. Also, just triple, quadruple checking that the surfaces are fine on the head itself, so there's not going to be any problems once that goes in. So now it's just a matter of moving things out of the way and carefully sliding it in. Just take your time again, like most everything else in this procedure. Nice gentle fitment. Make sure all the bolt holes are lining up, press down. Make sure there's nothing catching, no hoses under there by mistake or something else. All the spark plug holes line up properly. This went pretty well, pretty easy. And for you, it shouldn't be that bad either. To be honest, valve cover gaskets aren't that hard to do in general, unless, you've got a huge, expensive Mercedes or BMW or Lexus or who knows what special kind of stuff they're going to make you put in there. Anyway, so otherwise you should be fine with any regular passenger car or truck, just about. Again, I'm just double checking, making sure everything looks good, all seated fine. Right there I'm looking, making sure I can see daylight between the hole in the bottom of the car so that everything's lined up. All looks good. So next step, we're going to get the bolts out, put them in, and get this thing going. All right, time to bolt this in. But first of all, I just want to note here that I also marked the spark plugs themselves along with the wires just to show where everything goes in here. So I don't get lost and make a mistake in putting one plug in another spot. Just mark, so I marked it on the head as well as on the wires itself. Just a little FYI there, you can do the same thing. Now back to business here. I notice I'm going in using an inside-out pattern. You'll see this a lot when you're putting together, for instance, a head gasket, where this is actually more important than doing it on a valve cover gasket. In order to keep, what's the best way to put it? In order to keep the gasket flat, you start from the inside, as I'm doing here, and sort of work your way either clockwise or counterclockwise and bolt this thing down in stages. So right now I'm just doing very light pressure on this. I'm not really torquing it down at all. I'm just getting things nice and even, trying to get the bolts lined up so that they're all sort of at the same depth as we go through here, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do several passes of this. This is the first one. Again, I'm starting the inside and working my way out, sort of jumping back and forth so that no one section of the valve cover gasket gets torqued down first and you wind up with some sort of gap in the others. So again, sort of think of it as an inside-out pattern, just slowly working your way out. The idea is to come up with a consistent torquing on all the surfaces here so that you don't wind up with any gaps and therefore any oil leaks. So this is pass number one, just going through carefully doing this. There are several different, you could go leapfrogging from inside out. I'm just sort of doing it somewhat clockwise, just trying to get consistent pressure. They do have torque specs on these things, so I don't know how many foot-pounds they would necessarily require from the factory on this. Maybe 30 foot-pounds, something like that. What's more important, honestly, is making sure that it's consistent. Whether you've got 30 foot-pounds on this versus 32 foot-pounds, that's not so vital. Again, especially for a valve cover gasket. Head gasket, maybe you definitely want to use a torque wrench for something like that, but here, not so necessary. Now, I've just finished the first pass, so I'm starting again from the inside out. This is the second pass, just doing those inside bolts first, the ones closest to the middle, getting a little bit of torque down there, just, basically using my eyeballs and my finger pressure to determine how far I've gone, make sure that I've got even amounts of torque on each of these guys, just measuring the resistance. So notice I started, I'm jumping from one side to the other, going back and forth, making sure everything's down, torqued nice and evenly. Again, I started with the inside, worked my way out. Just, it's just good practice to do that. And again, I'm just going nice and slow here, like with everything else. Just take your time. And just getting finger tight pressure. We'll do another pass. I'll do another pass and get it tighter and nice. You don't have to go, and again, when you're tightening this down, you don't have to go completely crazy and just, break your wrist tightening it up. Just nice and snug it up is what you want to do. Try to give it as much torque as you remember taking off before. And again, for a valve cover gasket, it's just not as important as, say, a head gasket, getting the exact torque numbers down. You want to have consistent torque on all the bolts. That's far more important. And of course, on this and in yours, if you have the same thing, don't forget the two bolts on the side that we took out as well, the ones that were on the timing belt cover that I had my left hand on right there. So that's important too. Again, just going through, I'm going to do another pass. I won't necessarily show it to you guys, but you get the idea here. Inside out, start with the inside, work your way out, make sure everything's got nice, even amounts of torque, and you should be in business. No problem at all. And we're done. Spark plugs are in, engine's running, sounds great. Now I'm just looking for air, anything, air puffing out of someplace, or even worse, oil coming out from somewhere. Does the engine sound fine? It does. Again, just taking a look. All the hoses are back in place, in my case 2 hoses, and we're in business. You can see the belt spinning there. So I hope this video helps you when it comes time to change your own valve cover gasket. You can do this, definitely. If you've got a regular passenger car, these aren't that hard to do. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like it if you do, and tell your friends, and I hope this helps you in your own maintenance down the road. Thanks so much for watching.